Cole shoved my purse into my chest so hard the strap bit my collarbone. And when the SUV door slammed, Sienna laughed from the back seat like she had been waiting all day for this exact moment. The tires rolled over the shoulder gravel, caught the pavement again, and that low hum on the sunburned highway started fading so fast it felt like something sealing shut behind me. I stood there with one hand still half raised, sandal soles slipping in loose grit, foolish enough for one more second to think Cole might break, throw open the door, and tell me to get back in. He did not slow down, and when a semi blasted past close enough to rattle through my ribs, the heat hit my face like an oven door opening right against my skin. My phone showed almost nothing. My water bottle was empty, and the Arizona sun pressed through my blouse so hard I felt the sweat gather at my spine before I took a single step. That was when it landed. Not when Cole said, "Get out." Not when Sienna tossed back, "Let her figure it out." But when the road stayed empty and neither of them came back. I was 34 years old, standing off a Phoenix highway in triple-digit heat, with my purse on my shoulder and nowhere to go that either of them believed I could reach alone. Shock did not make everything louder for me. It narrowed the world to proof. The sting where the purse had hit, the smell of hot rubber, and the shimmer rising off the pavement ahead. I could still see Cole's face from seconds earlier. Not wild, not confused, just settled in a way that told me this did not begin on the shoulder. It only ended there. Sienna had leaned toward the open space where I had been sitting and said, "You always make everything harder than it has to be." And the line stayed with me because it sounded practiced, not cruel by accident. Another truck roared past. The wind tugged at my hair, and I finally moved because standing still out there no longer felt like disbelief. It felt like giving them more time to be right about me. By the time I took my first real step along the gravel shoulder, with the purse digging into my arm and the heat climbing through my sandals, I understood one thing clearly. They thought I had nowhere else to go. When I married Cole, I did not fall for charm because he never carried himself like that. I fell for steadiness, for the quiet reliability of a man who looked settled. He fixed what broke, remembered registration dates, carried heavy things without making a performance of it, and knew how to sound dependable in ways that made ordinary life feel safer. For a while, the proof matched the promise. The bills stayed current, the house stayed calm, and I mistook predictability for trust because nothing louder had warned me otherwise. Sienna was already an adult when I came into their lives, old enough to know I was not replacing her mother and old enough to decide she would never let me forget it. I did not push for closeness. I kept meals regular, remembered appointments, folded towels the same way every week, and let consistency stand where warmth never quite arrived. Somewhere inside those years, being easy to live with turned into being easy to dismiss. And I missed the change because it happened in small moments. She moved back in at 31 with a suitcase, storage bins, and a story about contract work drying up after a breakup. And Cole called it temporary before I spoke. I agreed because that was still the role I was playing then. The wife who heard, "She just needs a little time," and started making room instead of drawing terms. The first month looked manageable. Then the evidence began stacking quietly. Shoes by the door, laundry in the dryer, takeout on the counter, and no conversation about when she planned to leave. She never used words sharp enough to start a real fight, which made it worse. Because my name in that amused little voice landed harder than an insult would have. If I wrote expenses in my notebook, she leaned over my shoulder and breathed, "You make everything feel like homework." While Cole, without lifting his eyes, softened it with, "She's joking." Money started thinning in ways only the person watching every number would catch. A transfer that made no sense. A late bill. Groceries that did not match receipts. Then supplier envelopes tied to Cole's awning business started arriving already opened. And twice I found them on the kitchen island before I had touched the mailbox. His phone began lighting face down at dinner, and more than once I caught the same initial on the screen before he turned it over. A clean bee that disappeared too fast. There were papers, too. Quick sign pages pushed toward me with deadline language and routine language. And because he said, "It's standard," I signed faster than I should have. The drive back from Tucson already felt wrong. Weak air from the vents, trapped heat inside the SUV, and Sienna in the backseat scrolling like the rest of us were noise. I checked the bank app out of habit, saw another transfer I did not recognize, and kept my voice even when I turned toward Cole and said, "We talked about this." He stared through the windshield, let Sienna laugh first, then gave me the line he always used. "It's not that much." And when I looked between them, I caught one quick glance that made the shoulder feel inevitable before the tires ever touched gravel. That first night, I checked into a motel off the freeway with a rattling air unit, thin towels, and a door lock that clicked louder than anything in my chest. I set my purse on the bed, took off my wedding ring, turned it once between my fingers, and placed it on the nightstand like I still believed delay was a decision. By morning, the ring was still there. The room still smelled like bleach and old smoke, and I slid it into the small pocket of my purse instead of back onto my hand. I bought a prepaid phone, a toothbrush, shampoo, socks, and the kind of things that look small in a basket until they are all you have left. Then I drove to a workforce center because it was the only place I could think of where people went when they had run out of other plans. The waiting room held plastic chairs, humming lights, and people clutching folders. And when my number came up, I handed over my work history like I was passing a stranger the outline of a woman I used to be. I sat at a public computer and turned my life into bullet points. Part-time arts administration, calendar management, billing support, office coordination, and every line looked flatter than the years behind it. When the printer spat the pages into the tray, I held them in both hands and understood how quickly a marriage can vanish from paper when it stops protecting you. Back in the motel, I lined up my new things on the bathroom counter. Phone charger, soap, toothbrush, folded socks, and the order of it steadied me more than sleep did. A week later, I answered a temporary listing for office help at a small industrial supply company in Chandler, and Jody Keller pointed at a desk buried in invoices and told me, "Start there." I sorted everything into paid, unpaid, and missing before lunch. And when she came back with a coffee, she looked at the cleared surface and nodded once, like usefulness was a language she trusted. Nobody in that office treated me like I might break. And because they handed me work instead of pity, I could feel my mind begin to settle around something solid again. The apartment came next. Small kitchen, thin walls, a ceiling fan that clicked at night, and a lease with only my name on it because this time I read every line. I paid the deposit myself, carried in grocery bags myself, and turned the deadbolt myself. And each plain little action felt bigger than anything I had done in years. I still cried in the shower sometimes because the sound stayed inside the tile, but even that belonged to a room with a lock I had paid for. One evening after closing, Jody leaned against my desk, watched me straighten a stack of vendor files, and said, "Men like that count on your shame lasting longer than your anger." I looked at the neat rows in front of me, every folder labeled, every date visible, and because the evidence was right there under my hands, I knew she was right. I was not strong yet, not healed, not finished with what Cole and Sienna had done, but I had a paycheck, a key, and an address they had not chosen for me. A forwarded envelope reached my apartment on a Thursday, bent at one corner, my new address stamped over the old one, and Cole's company name printed in the return block. I opened it at my kitchen table, expecting something delayed or misplaced, then saw my own name repeated across supplier forms, account references, and guarantee language dated after he abandoned me. The pages looked ordinary until I read the dates twice, and then the paper in my hands stopped feeling like mail and started feeling like a trap that had kept moving without me. I spread everything across the table, invoice copies, vendor notices, signature lines, and terms I recognized just enough to feel my stomach tighten before I reached the bottom page. Some signatures were mine from those rushed kitchen counter moments when Cole slid forms toward me and muttered, "It's routine. Just sign so I can keep things moving." Others felt wrong in a quieter way. Not dramatic, not obvious, but built from old trust, old scans, and my name still carrying weight inside a business I no longer touched. The next morning, I went to the public library because the envelope had already given me enough evidence to stop wondering and start matching dates against public records. I searched business filings, license information, vendor references, and every document tied to Cole's awning company, then printed the entries that lined up too neatly with what I had found. By the time the printer tray filled, I understood the real danger was not only that he left me behind, but that he left my name where the debt had begun to thicken. I brought the folder to work and sat with it too long at my desk before Jody set down her coffee, looked at my face, and said, "Let me see it." She read the top pages in silence, tracked the dates, the guarantee wording, and the supplier references, then lifted her eyes and gave me the only sentence that mattered. "You need to know exactly where you stand." Because those pages were sitting open between us, with my name stamped on liabilities I had not touched in years. I did not argue. I just nodded and called a lawyer. Reed Talbot read everything carefully, asked what I had truly signed, and let me answer without rushing when I told him some forms were mine and some were not. He marked the later dates with his pen, built the timeline from the motel receipt to my lease to my job records, and said, "There's exposure here, but there's also separation." Then he gave me rules instead of comfort. Do not sign anything new. Do not meet Cole alone. And do not mistake his panic for responsibility that belongs to you. A week later, a local station filmed a small business segment at Jody's company. And when the reporter turned toward me, I kept it plain and said, "I keep things from falling through the cracks." The piece aired that evening. My name sat at the bottom of the screen for a few seconds, and before it ended, my prepaid phone began lighting up with unknown numbers. I let the first call ring out, then played the first voicemail, and Cole's voice came through tight and urgent, not asking where I had been, only saying, "Call me. We need to talk before this gets worse." Reed agreed to one meeting and only one. Public place. Daylight. No paperwork touched until he reviewed it. And I followed that instruction because I finally understood rules could keep me safer than hope. I picked a chain restaurant off the freeway where nobody expected intimacy and everybody expected people to come and go, then parked where I could leave without backing into anything. Cole was already inside when I walked in, shoulders squared too carefully, menu unopened, face arranged into the same reasonable expression he had worn the last time he tried to make harm sound practical. He stood when he saw me and reached for normal so quickly it almost made me laugh. "Mallory, you look good." Then waited like that sentence should soften the table between us. I sat down, kept my purse on my shoulder, and said, "What do you need?" Because his voicemail had already answered the part about what he felt. He tried concern first, then regret, without detail, then landed where Reed said he would. On the business, the licensing pressure, the supplier accounts, and the documents he claimed only needed a few clarifications. I let him talk because the words themselves were evidence now, and the more he explained, the more clearly he described a machine that had kept using my name after he left me on the highway. He leaned forward over the table and lowered his voice like that made him honest. "I'm trying to protect you." And I looked at him long enough to make the silence do some work. Then I said, "Protect me from what?" "Cole. From paperwork you kept alive with my name after you threw me out of your car." And his face tightened because the sentence matched the dates he already knew I had. He shifted to the older strategy after that. The one that relied on flattening everything until his choices and my survival sounded like equal parts of one messy story. "We both made mistakes," he said, and the second the words landed, I felt the whole room clear inside me because the bill dates, the forwarded envelope, and the motel receipt had already killed that lie. I said, "You left me on the shoulder in triple-digit heat. I found a motel, a job, and a lease. So no, we did not make the same mistake." And for the first time, he stopped reaching for the next smooth sentence. Once he lost the softer language, other things started showing through. Wording too polished for him, phrases about exposure, documentation, and account integrity that sounded closer to vendor compliance than contractor panic. I had seen that same clipped style in the supplier notices and in the pages tied to my name, and hearing it come out of his mouth narrowed the silhouette around the person behind it. I did not say Brinley's name because I did not need to. Not with the earlier B on his phone, the wording in the mail, and this script now sitting fully alive between us. Sienna helped without meaning to when her voicemail arrived that night, brittle and impatient, insisting I had disappeared for years and was now making everything worse for everyone else. I saved it beside Cole's messages because her voice carried the same assumption their house always had, that I would eventually come back and absorb whatever they had spilled. The hearing notice reached me 2 days later, and I built my folder the way I had rebuilt everything else. Motel receipt, prepaid phone record, apartment lease, first pay stub, forwarded mail, voicemail log. Every page arranged to cut my name cleanly away from theirs. The hearing room looked exactly like the kind of place where people pretend paperwork is cleaner than the lives attached to it. Beige walls, fluorescent light, chairs lined in rows. Reed sat beside me with my folder squared to the table, and across the room Cole waited in a pressed shirt while Sienna crossed her arms and watched me like contempt still counted as leverage. I had brought dates, receipts, records, and a lease with only my name on it. So, by the time my case was called, fear felt less useful than order. Cole spoke first and did what men like him always do when the facts are bad. He flattened everything into confusion, miscommunication, pressure, and paperwork that had simply gotten away from everyone. Then Reed stood, handed over the timeline, and when my turn came, I walked to the front with the motel receipt, the prepaid phone record, the lease, and my first pay stub already in sequence. I said, "On the day Cole left me on the shoulder, my involvement in that household ended, and everything after these dates moved forward without my knowledge, my control, or my consent." Nobody interrupted because the documents were already sitting there in order, each page dated, each page answering the lie before it could fully form. I placed the guarantee forms beside the later account references and said, "They kept my name inside the business longer than they kept me inside the car." And that sentence held because the dates beneath it did. Then I turned once towards Sienna and said, "You laughed because you thought I had nowhere else to go," and the room went still in the kind of silence that only arrives after proof. What happened after that did not need drama from me, because the questions shifted where they belonged. Onto Cole, onto the later documents, onto the gap between my records and his story. By the time we stepped into the hallway, the line had been drawn cleanly enough that he could no longer hide me inside his liabilities or call that protection. He caught my name one last time, offered a thin, late apology, and I let it pass through the space between us because regret spoken after exposure was never the same thing as remorse. That night, I went home to my own apartment, made something simple, locked my own door, and sat under the clicking ceiling fan with a quiet I had paid for myself. A week later, Jody made my position permanent, and on the drive home, I realized the room had not changed my life as much as the months before it had. The job, the key, the lease, the proof. Thank you for staying with me through this story. And if part of it felt close to something you have lived, I hope it reminds you that peace can still find you after humiliation, and that building one honest life of your own can be its own kind of love.